Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. This is the webinar on Understanding the Experience Mod presented by John Oliver. My name is Cassie Hopkins, and I help coordinate the webinars here at Houseman Group. I'm going to go over just a couple housekeeping items, and then I'm going to turn it over to John, and you guys are going to learn all about the Experience Mod. Just a couple things right up front. This webinar is recorded, which means if for any reason you would like to return to it, maybe you leave halfway through the webinar or you'd like to share it with someone, you will get an email that will have a link to the recording as well as a copy of the presentation slides. Secondly, John is going to be doing more interactive prompts during the webinar. So if you would not use the Q&A to respond to those prompts, but please use the chat feature. And then if you have a question, please enter it into the Q&A feature. And we're hoping that we will have time to get to it today, but if we don't, we will try our best to get there by directly contacting you after the webinar. So without further ado, I will read a little bit of John's bio and then we will get right into it. So John joined the team in 2022 as the manager of property and casualty claims. He is now the director of client services risk management. Prior to joining Houseman Group, he spent 15 years working for a handful of insurance carriers, including Church Mutual, QBE, and NSI. John's career focus has been on providing risk management and claim mitigation support to clients of all shapes and sizes. He's been fortunate to collaborate with a wide array of insurance professionals in claims, risk control, underwriting, and marketing. Thanks so much for being here, John. Welcome.
Thank you, Cassie, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. As Cassie said, we're going to try to keep this as engaging as possible. So throughout the discussion, I would love it to have everyone respond in the chat. And before we get started, can we just do a quick check-in here? Maybe a quick good morning from everyone, or how you're doing, how you're feeling about the snow and ice here in Wisconsin. Make sure that everything's coming through loud and clear. Great. Yeah. The walk to the bus stop was fun. Excellent. Well, I'm happy to see that everything's working great. Let's go ahead and jump into this. For anybody here that had joined us for the work comp seminar that we hosted last September, this is going to be a really familiar experience, but this is such an important topic for any organization that I think it's a great refresher. What we're going to talk about today is the experience mod, and I want to kind of start by acknowledging some goals and what we're aiming to achieve. So first off, the experience mod is math. You know, it's a number, and a lot of people can be spooked out by math or numbers or calculations. And I just want to make it clear that our goal today is not to have everyone here walk away as like a true expert on calculating and understanding the experience mod, you know, top to bottom. That's not a realistic goal for us, not because it's so complicated, but because most of you aren't going to be living and breathing the experience mod day after day throughout the year. It's really one of those numbers that gets calculated and changes once per year. And realistically, once you see that number get updated, you're going to forget a lot of the minutia. But understanding high level what it means, what goes into it, is really going to be what we're most focused on today. The way that we're going to tackle this discussion-wise is we're just going to make sure we're getting on the same page. I'm going to talk a little bit about what the mod is, like at a theoretical level. We'll get into the math. We're going to keep it pretty straightforward. And then once we understand the basics of the calculation, we're going to add some wrinkles. We're going to add more precision and make sure that you understand really how it works at a core level. Finally, we'll kind of wrap it all up and make sure that you understand how this impacts you and your organization. And then, as Cassie said, we're going to aim to have some time for questions, and we'll just kind of see how we're doing on time. As she mentioned, we're happy to follow up after the fact. So let's just jump right into it, getting on the same page. I want to start by asking a quick question. Who here knows what their firm's experience mod is? In the chat, just let us yes or no. Do you know what it is? We don't need to actually know your specific mod number. Just curious, who knows what theirs is? Take a couple seconds here. Seeing lots of yeses, but a couple no's, which is great. Okay. Great. Looks like we're seeing more yeses than nos, which is great. And hopefully by the end of this discussion, you'll have a better understanding of what that number actually means for you and your organization. I also wanted to touch on the fact that we use a lot of different terms when referring to the experience mod. This whole list here, if you hear me use any of these, or you're familiar with these, or you hear somebody else reference one of these terms, they're all the same thing. This is all the experience mod. You'll probably hear me refer to it as the mod or the experience mod throughout the day, but I just wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page. And EMR is the same thing as a mod factor, is the same thing as the work comp mod, all the same thing. I also wanted to address that where you are and where you do business has a big impact on your mod. Today, we're going to spend most of our time really focused in on Wisconsin statute and the way that Wisconsin calculates the mod. But we're also going to touch on anybody that has an NCCI mod. And again, that'll make more sense here soon, which should cover the vast majority of people here. That said, if you have exposure, if you have employees working in Ohio or California or different states, some of what we discussed today may be a little bit different, but at a high level, you should still walk away with a pretty good understanding. All right, now that we're all on the same page, let's talk about what is the experience mod. I'm a big believer that the best predictor of how somebody or an organization is going to perform into the future is how they performed in the past. And that is exactly what the experience mod is. It's a number that takes your experience with work comp claims and injuries to your employees and your staff and uses that information to create a prediction about what might happen over the next year in terms of employee safety and work comp claims. It is a number, so the number is going to be 3 digits. And what you're seeing here, for anybody that's red, green, colorblind, I apologize. We're going to use some red and some greens to denote good and bad. The red arrow pointing up indicates that a higher number is not where we want to be. Anything under a 1, that's great. That's what we want to be looking at. The way that the mod is used is also really important to understand. So primarily, the experience mod is used by insurance companies as a multiplier to adjust your premiums to move how much you pay in any given year for your work comp insurance. It can also be used in some industries. So it's fairly common. We see with our construction clients, for example, the mod can be used when bidding on jobs and as a filtering tool. So for example, if you're a subcontractor, a general contractor may say that we only want to work with subs that have an experience mod of 1 or lower. And if you have a higher mod than that, you may be required to answer additional questions, or you may actually lose out on a job entirely, which is common. So that's a secondary way that it can be used as a measurement, but typically helps to price insurance products. All right, so let's get into it. As we said, it's a number, and it compares your work comp experience against your peers, people in your same industry, over a really specific time period. So we're going to keep it really high level right now. Essentially, the way it works, as we said, it's a multiplier. So we take a base rate, we multiply it by your experience mod, and at the end of the day, that's going to be your work comp premium. And the reason this is really important is work comp premiums tend to be half or more of a typical firm's insurance spend. So obviously it can be a really big chunk of money. And as you'll see here in a moment, whatever your mod is has the ability to swing your premiums at a pretty important level. So let's use an example. If your mod was 0.82, we've got this green here. We're in good territory right now. This is where we want to be. We would take your base rate. It's not going to change, and we'll get into that a little bit more soon. Take your base rate. That's not changing. Your mod is 0.82. That's going to result, just basic math here, a lower number is going to lower your actual premium. And in fact, a typical mod of 1, that's a perfectly average number, average experience for that organization. If you have a 0.82, your premiums will be 18% less than a competitor with a 1.0 or average mod. That's a big deal. 18%. It can be money used for new hires, new equipment, different kinds of investment throughout the organization. Now let's take a different situation. If we have a mod of 1.03, obviously that base rate, as we said, doesn't change. But now this organization with a 1.03 is going to have higher premiums. Their premiums will be 3 points higher, 3% more paid in a given year for premiums. And this number can be a lot higher. We can see a 1.4, we can see a 1.7. And in those instances, you're paying literally 70% more than a competitor would be for the same coverage, same experience. So again, we're gonna talk more about this, but I think it's important to understand the role of an experience mod as a multiplier. All right, so that's really high level what the mod is. Higher than a 1, that means you're having more claims experience than a competitor. Lower than a 1 means you're having better claims experience than a competitor. And a 1.0 means kind of exactly what would be expected for your organization. It's really important to understand too that we're not looking at all claims ever. That's not a realistic way to kind of price or predict future claims. We're going to look at a very specific time period. The period that we look for to help determine somebody's experience mod are the 4 most recent policy years, but then we do not include the most recent year. So really, we're just looking at 3 years of claims. And the reason that we do that is claims from the past year there's still some uncertainty. It can take time for a work comp claim to settle, to understand what kind of treatment might be necessary for that employee, to understand how they're healing. And so rather than adding that uncertainty into the calculation, the mod skips it for the time being, and then that experience will get picked up in future years. And I know that can sound a little complicated, so let's just look at a quick example. Many organizations have a work comp policy that goes into effect on January 1st. It's not the only time. It's not required by law to start on January 1st, but it tends to be a very common policy effective date. So if your organization's work comp your work comp policy goes into effect on January 1st, we're going to look at the 4 most recent years, but we're going to get rid of the most recent one. So for your 1/1/2025, January of this year, the claims that are going to impact your experience mod are going to be from 2021, 2022, and 2023. Those claims are going to be entered into the calculation. And again, we're going to get into how that all comes together in a moment, but it's 3 years looking back. So this 1/1, a January 1st effective date, tends to be relatively easy to understand. Let's look at if your effective date was today. It's March 20th, 2025. Today is the day that your experience mod goes into, or your policy goes into effect. The claims that we would be looking at to help understand what your mod would be March 20th, 2021, and any claims or injuries that occur through March 19th, 2024. So as you can see, anything that's happened in the last 365 days aren't being considered for this time period. All right, let's do a quick check-in again. True or false? So in the chat, let's hear true or false. T or F is fine. True or false? Your experience mod is an accurate measurement of how safe your company is today, right now. Is it an accurate measurement of how safe you are today? Seeing a couple different answers here. Always curious to see how folks think about this. Seeing, I would say, pretty close to an even split, maybe a few more people leaning towards false. Personally, I would say that I think this is more on the false end. And the reason for that is, remember, your mod today is an indicator of what happened over a 4-year window. Think about how much can change in 4 years. You could have entirely new management, entirely new employees. You could be doing different work. lots can change over that period. And so while it's a good approximation of how your organization might perform in the future, it's not a perfect proxy for exactly how safe you are today. And I think that's a really important thing to remember. And it goes both ways. If you have a great experience mod, say your experience mod right now is 0.75, 25 points better than average. That's obviously a great place to be. We want to have a lower mod. But if you've lost lots of key employees, if you've gotten rid of a safety director, if you've changed your culture, if something's different, that will be borne out over time. And it's still important to, not rest once we have a good experience mod. And the same is true if you have a high mod. If you have a 1.4 experience mod, that doesn't mean that your team now has failed in any meaningful way. That just means that over that window, there were opportunities for improvement, and that at that point, your experience was worse than it might have expected to be. All right. So now we're getting into the math, and we're going to start with the easy math. The thing I want to emphasize most right now is what I'm getting ready to share with you is not accurate. There are lots of things that we're going to do to complicate this. This is just a starting point for us, and we're going to build on it. So it's important that we kind of stick with this. Again, just adding that what you're about to see is not exactly accurate. So the highest level possible, your experience mod is the dollars paid on claims over that time period over what we would expect those claims to look like over that same time period. Pretty straightforward division problem. If claim dollars actually paid are higher than expected, you're going to have a higher mod. And if they're lower, you're going to have a lower mod. And I just want to point out one caveat here, that the claim dollars information are payments made for injured employees on the work comp policy, but it also includes things that haven't necessarily been paid yet, and we call those reserves. So claim reserves are what the work comp adjuster feels are the most likely outcomes for that specific claim. So if you have an employee, for example, that injures their back and they haven't had surgery, but the adjuster, given all of the information they have, expects that surgery may be coming down the road, they will put money aside in reserves, anticipating those future expenses, and that will be part and considered part of your claims experience in the experience mod calculation. So again, it's important to understand that some of it is anticipated rather than explicitly paid out. So let's just kind of demonstrate what this looks like. So if your organization had $10,000 in work comp claims over that 3-year period, and given your size and industry, you were expected to have 10,000. 10,000 divided by 10,000 equals 1. You're right where you were expected to be. That is perfectly average for your industry. You would have a 1. Now, let's take a different situation. Say your organization is much larger than that previous example. You had $896,000 in claims, but you were expected to have $896,000. So this firm is much larger than the previous one. But again, their experience over their expectation is right in line with one another. And so 896 divided by 896 also equals 1. Does that make sense? Oh, so, all right, let's use another example. So again, claim dollars over claim expected. In this situation, you have $15,000 paid out versus 10,000 expected. In this case, 15,000 divided by 10,000 equals 1.5. So again, 1.5, you're going to spend 50 points more on work comp premiums in this example. We'll give another one on the other end here. So say you only have 6,000 paid out or set aside in reserves, and you're expected to have 10. In this case, you would have a 0.6 mod. I have the asterisk here, and this is where we're now going to add some wrinkles to this. There is such a thing as a minimum experience mod. So if we take this example that we've used here and we say, actually over 3 years, your firm had 0 claims, 0 divided by anything is going to be 0. but there is no such thing as a zero mod for your organization. There's always going to be some minimum number that if you have no claims over time, your mod is going to be kind of stuck at this single number. So I want to just, again, everything we've shared so far is imprecise. All right, let's keep moving on. So now we've taken the basic math and we're going to add some wrinkles to it. We're going to take away that simplicity that we've just talked, kind of number dollars over expectation, and we're going to get a little more complicated. But I promise we'll make this as approachable as possible. I'm viewing this in three different buckets. Some of the wrinkles that we're adding to the equation are going to help make it more precise. It's going to create a better prediction or analysis of your claims experience. Some of the things that are added to this are penalties for employers that have too many claims or large claims. But it's not all bad news. There are some things added to the calculation that also provide relief to an organization, and we'll discuss those in more detail as well. All right, so let's start with precision. There are different things built into the experience mod that take into consideration your industry. I think this is really, really important. That's what we'll touch on first. Then there's consideration for the size of your organization, sort of regardless of what industry you're in. And finally, we'll touch on that minimum mod component that I kind of just hinted at on our previous section. So let's start with this. Not all organizations are the same. Let's start in the bottom right corner. This is what we do at Houseman Group. This is my kind of role. This is a desk job in an office. An office job is not without any hazards, but it's relatively unlikely that I, on any given day or year, am going to have a work comp claim. And that is true for all of my colleagues and for many of you here on the call that might have desk or administrative jobs. So for every $100 of payroll for somebody in a role like mine, an office or administrative job, the expectation would be that we would have 7 cents of work comp claims for every $100 of payroll for anybody in the organization in this role. On the other end, in this example, we have roofers. That's a very difficult job. It's physical, you're outdoors, you're at height. It is, the likelihood of an injury for a roofer versus an office worker is dramatically different. And so the expected loss rate for a roofer, for example, in Wisconsin is $4.96 of expected claim dollars for every $100 in payroll for that kind of role. We have a few different ones here kind of showing the gamut, and there are tables and tables for all the different class codes that you and your colleagues may have, depending on the work that gets done. I always think it's really fascinating. The top right corner, we have law enforcement here. I think a lot of us think of that as a very dangerous and risky job, and it is no doubt dangerous and risky. But the math suggests that for every $100 in payroll in law enforcement, there's only an expectation that 0.92 or 92 cents, would be paid out in work comp claims in that role. And you have kitchen staff at 54 cents, landscaping 249. So again, the mod takes this information and we call it the expected loss rate, and that gets built into the calculation. So let's talk a little bit more about that. The expected loss rate takes into consideration your industry, and then it also, because it's a rate tied to payroll, takes into consideration the size of your organization. So for every new employee you add, your payrolls will go up, and therefore we take the expected loss rate and we multiply it by that payroll, and your expected claims would start to slowly creep up and get higher, with consideration given for your industry. I want to add a couple more details here, this kind of second bullet point about confidence levels. So the bigger your organization gets, the more confidence we have in understanding what your claims experience is doing to the experience mod, and we have more confidence in future predictions about those numbers. So I'm just going to introduce two new terms here, weighting value and ballast. They're important parts of the mod, but I wouldn't say they're critical for you in your day-to-day job understanding what these numbers are. It's important to just understand the high level impact that they're going to have on your experience mod. So the weighting value influences the specific impact of different claims that you have, and the ballast fluctuates and really has an impact on the minimum mod that your organization can have. This is one of my favorite things to point out and really make sure that we're hammering home. Anybody that's attending this or ever hears any of the talks that we give about experience mod, it's really important to me that you walk away and we never hear this statement again, that it's common to hear like, for our industry, we have a really good mod. That's not how the mod works. If you own a roofing contractor and your mod is a 1, that doesn't mean your experience is better than an office, an insurance agency that has a 1.0 mod. The mod itself takes into consideration your industry by using those different expected loss rates. So again, it's not a comparison of one firm versus the other. It's that means that your mod, if you're a roofing contractor, if you have a great mod, that means you're great in your industry, and it's kind of all built together. So I hope that's clear. Your mod being low is great regardless of your industry. All right, just really quick, we're not going to go into this in too much detail, but I wanted to show and highlight how this works. So the weighting value, again, something we introduced. This is one of the rate tables in Wisconsin. It shows your expected losses kind of on the left side, and if you fall somewhere within these numbers, it explains or spits out a weighting value, which is kind of a double-digit decimal there. As you can see on the right side of this, the larger your expected losses, the larger your weighting value gets. And what that means is we're going to place more weight on each claim that we have because we're just more confident in the math. And then again, the ballast is the one that kind of influences the minimum mod. And again, as you have more expected losses, your ballast will be higher. So let's give a quick example. We have 2 firms here. We have Landscaping Inc. and then we have Guy with a Truck LLC. They're both in the same industry. They both provide landscaping services, but Guy with a Truck is 20 times smaller in payroll than Landscaping Inc. All right, so we have these 2 different firms, totally same industry, but very different sizes. So Landscaping Inc., over their 3-year period, had 8 claims, and you can kind of see the different numbers here: 1,200, 900, a lot of things maybe around the $2,000 or lower mark. And then they have 2 bigger ones. They have a $13,000 claim and a $7,500 claim. That's Landscaping Inc. And then we have Guy with a Truck LLC, as we said, 20 times smaller than Landscaping Inc. And over their 3-year window, they had 2 claims. One of them is $46,000. That's a big claim. And then the other is a small $250 claim. Looking at these 2 examples, if you were trying to understand what to expect from them moving forward, we would just have a lot more confidence in what Landscaping Inc.'s future looks like. They have a lot more people and a lot more claims. And so we can kind of predict next year, we're going to expect to see a handful of claims. Most are going to be relatively minor, and they may have 1 or 2 bigger ones. But just there's more numbers there, and we have a little more confidence. Then we have Guy with a Truck. They're relatively small. They had 1 big claim, but that's I think it's safe to say that could have been an anomaly, that the likelihood that somebody tears their ACL every single year with a $46,000 claim is relatively unlikely. And so we place a little bit less confidence on a smaller organization like Guy with a Truck. Using the same example, I just want to point out a different scenario. Let's say both of these firms have 0 claims over that window. I'm curious, given what we've talked about so far, which of these do you think should have the lower experience mod, or do you think they should be the same? In the chat, let me know. Who here, Landscaping Inc. should have the lower mod? Guy with a Truck should have a lower mod if they've had 0 claims over this 3-year window, or should they have the same experience mod? Right. So far, I haven't seen anybody say guy with a truck should have a lower one. Oh, wait, maybe. They're both in landscaping and they both have had 0 claims. We're more confident in Landscaping Inc.'s numbers, and in this case, their numbers are 0 because they're larger. We have a better feel for what should be happening. The bigger you are, the more expected losses you should be expected to have. And then if you have none, you should get credit for it, is the way that we think about it. So in this case, Landscaping Inc. would have the lower experience mod. It doesn't mean that guy with a truck did anything wrong. They certainly didn't. In both of these scenarios, they would have a mod under 1 because they had fewer claims than expected. But in this instance, Landscaping Inc., the bigger you are, the lower your claim number, the more likely you are to have a lower minimum mod. All right. So again, the experience mod takes into consideration the kind of work you do and the number of employees you have by using payroll to help, add precision to the numbers. So just a quick recap, we take consideration for industry, we take consideration for size, and built into all of that is some support for developing a minimum mod. All right, so we're coming back to our equation now. This was all our simple starting point, claims dollars paid over claims dollars expected. And now we're gonna add some of these wrinkles to it. So we're gonna take the same general idea and we're gonna make it a little more complicated. So at the top, we have claim dollars paid. That hasn't changed, but now we're adding into that the weighting value for your firm and the ballast. Again, these are tied to expected losses. So in the size of your firm, those numbers are going to change. And on the bottom, we have the expected losses still, but the way that we're calculating expected losses is your loss rate. So again, if you're full admin office staff like we are at Houseman Group, your expected loss rate is going to be relatively low. If you're a roofing company, you might have some admin, some roofing class codes. All that math kind of goes together and you take your expected loss rates times payroll and you divide by 100 over that 3-year window of claims that we're looking at. And then we also add back in on the denominator here, the weighting value and the ballast. And then that's what gives us the experience mod. We're not all the way there yet, so this isn't exactly right, but it's getting more precise as we're kind of building towards the real calculation. All right. Moving on, next question for you. So I want you to imagine that you are now an insurance company and you can only insure one of these firms, firm A or firm B. And we're going to assume that everything else is equal. Same industry, same employee count, same payroll, everything. The only difference between these two organizations is firm A, over their 3-year window, had five $5,000 claims, so $25,000 paid out in claims. And firm B only had 1 claim, but it was $50,000. Which of these two would you prefer to insure moving forward, all else being equal? In the chat, firm A or firm B? Seeing a big consensus around firm B. So you would all rather insure the organization that had more claims dollars paid out than firm A that had more claims, but they were smaller. And you know what? I totally agree with you. Generally speaking, the lower your frequency, the better likelihood you are to have fewer claims moving forward. And the idea here is that this one $50,000 claim was bad. And I always like using an injured knee as an example. Picture firm A, they're $5,000 claims were all sprained knees. So these are employees doing, you know, you name it, whatever kind of work. And each one of them sprained their knee. They went into urgent care. They maybe had to do a little physical therapy. They had ice and medicine, but they kind of capped those out at 5,000. $5,000 claims. And then firm B, that was somebody that tweaked their knee, but in their case, it was a torn ACL and they had to have surgery. Firm B had one injury. Firm A had five. Every one of those five injuries that Firm A had easily could have been a torn ACL. The difference between a sprain and a tear is relatively minor, and it's not always within an organization's control how severe something is. So generally speaking, we want to work with an organization that has fewer claims, and the mod takes this into consideration. So we're going to talk now about penalties that are built into the mod for organizations that have more claims than expected or anticipated given loss history. So the way that this works is there's no number in the mod that says claim count. It's not, well, they had 20, so the number 20 appears somewhere in the experience mod. It doesn't quite work that way. The way that the mod takes into consideration frequency is by something called the split point. So what the split point is it takes the first certain number of dollars of every single claim, and it weights that piece of it more heavily than others within the mod. So in Wisconsin, over the last 5 years, you can see a slow, steady creep of the split point. And in our current situation, so I know it says 2024, we're in 2025, but this is still impacting us today until we get to October. I'm not going to worry about the details there. You just got to trust me that in any claim right now, any mod that's been calculated since October of 24, the split point is $20,500. The first $20,500 of every one of your claims is considered primary. Anything under the split point is primary. Anything over that is excess. So let's look at an example here. For a $5,000 claim, primary in this situation would be 5,000. It's under the split point, and so the whole thing is primary. And in that situation, there is no excess. In a $25,000 claim, the primary is going to go up again to the split point, 20,500. Excess in that situation would be 4,500, and then on and on. So 50,000, the excess there jumps to 29,500. And then in the $500,000 claim, which does happen, we see large claims like this on a regular basis. Excess in this case is going to be a little bit different. There's more of a caveat that we're going to add, and we're going to address that in a second. So the first primary part of the claim, we're going to look at a very at a very detailed level. You're going to feel most of that as an organization in your mod. The excess, this is where that weighting value we discussed comes into play, gets lowered by whatever your organization's weighting value is. So you get a little bit of relief for the larger claims, but you're going to feel the full effect of the primary. And I know that's maybe a little complicated, so let's look back at our two firms that we discussed earlier, Firm A and Firm B. Start with Firm A. A reminder that they had five $5,000 claims. So in that situation, the primary for Firm A is $25,000 because not a single one of those hit the split point. So you're going to add 5,000, 5,000, 5,000 for each of the five, and all of that is considered primary. So in their case, they have no excess. Firm B, on the other hand, had one claim that was $50,000. And so that one claim, the primary component is 20,500, and then the excess is 29,500. So this split point applies to each individual claim. And as you can see here now, it makes a little more sense that Firm A is going to feel that penalty versus Firm B, who's getting a little bit of relief for only having the single claim. So this is the split point is the way that the mod penalizes an organization with high frequency. All right, so let's bring that to our former equation. So this is the last version that we discussed where we introduced expected loss rate and the weighted values in the ballast. We're going to complicate it further. And there's a lot of words here, but I promise you that if, as we talk through this, it will all kind of come together and make some sense. So the claim dollars on the top, your actual experience, we're going to take the full primary claim dollars. That's everything under the split point for each individual claim. And then we're going to take the excess, but we're going to multiply that excess by your weighting value. So we're going to lower the impact of all your bigger claims in your claim dollar on the top part of the calculation. And then we don't need to really worry about the 1 minus the weighting value. All that is to say is it adds and some additional math to provide relief depending on the size of your organization. And the expected dollars now on the bottom is just a little more nuanced. Now we're taking expected primary claims. So the rating tables from Wisconsin indicate what we would expect your primary claims to be, and it indicates what we would expect your excess claims to be. So you take these claims experience over claims expectation, and it's still, we're still getting the mod. All right. I want to remind you, if any of this is unclear, I really want to make sure that we're addressing any questions. So please don't forget to use the Q&A if you have any questions, and we'll make sure if we have extra time, we'll address it here, or I want to, I'm happy to reach out after the fact and talk through it. All right. Lastly, we want to talk about relief. So it's not all bad news. It's not all about penalizing employers. There are ways of providing relief, particularly for capping really, really large claims. There are also ways of creating incentives within the mod for bringing people back to work, and some additional reductions. So we're going to jump into those right now. I want to start with capping really big claims. In the experience mod, any single claim can really only hurt you so much. And the reason for that is the difference between a catastrophic injury and a minor one is it can be pretty small. And at the end of the day, the employer may not have a lot of control over that. They also want to put more frequency or emphasis on the frequency than they do for an organization that has a few big claims. And the other reason is if every dollar of an injury influenced your mod, as we're going to see in this next example, that would have pretty catastrophic implications for your organization and your finances. So we're going to talk about the example. This is the claim example that we reference a lot. This was something that happened with one of our clients here at Hausman Group, and I think really represents the reason that we put caps on the experience mod. So in this scenario, an employee for this organization lost the toenail on their big toenail on one of their feet. They didn't lose the toe. This wasn't an amputation. It literally was just the toenail came off after somebody stepped on the employee's toe with their shoe. This employee is wearing sandals. At this point, I think we can agree that this employer could have prevented this claim from occurring in the first place if this employee was required to wear closed-toed shoes. So at this point, given everything we know right now, the employer had the ability to prevent this claim kind of as defined. This injury eventually led to something called CRPS, and we don't need to get into the specifics of it, but all you need to understand is that this employee felt pain in such an extreme way for an extended period of time. And there's a kind of a mental component to this. This is a real thing, and the diagnosis was kind of borne out by the professionals. And they approved in this situation a surgery to implant in this individual a spinal cord stimulator. This was intended to help trigger parts of their brain to try and take away that pain response that this person had been feeling at an extreme level in their lower extremities. Again, the injury is still just a big toenail gone, but this person had complications that really kind of exacerbated it. So now I want you to think, in this case, think about a surgery that requires implanting something near your spinal cord. That all of a sudden, this small toenail claim has grown into something much larger than that. And at this point, the employee didn't have control over this kind of response. They just had control over the initial injury. This employee further claimed after the fact that because of the pain they were experiencing and the impact of their injury, that they were permanently and totally disabled, unable to ever work a meaningful job again. So this becomes part of the claim. Their lost wages had to be taken into consideration. And all of a sudden, you take the medical component, which is already ballooned, and we add in this this indemnity piece tied to their lost wages. And all of a sudden, this is a really, really big claim. So in the chat, I want people to just throw in a guess at how much this claim, given everything you know so far, had been valued at. What do you think the total claim cost in this example is? I like that first one, 1.5, 1.2. Those are some big numbers. $1 million. You're all in the right ballpark. This claim totaled out to $931,000, again, for a toenail. It's just incredible. So let's take what we learned and we're going to place this claim into the calculation as is without any kind of limits placed on it. So the primary piece in this claim would be that 20,500. That's primary in this situation. That's under the split point. Then we're going to take a really low weighting value in this case, the 0.05 that you can see here. That's the weighting value. And everything else, this $910,000, that's the excess on this claim. 910,000 times 0.05, that spits out $45,000. So that's the piece in this calculation that would go into the claim dollars paid out. So the math on this situation becomes 66,000 claim dollars actual experience over expectation. In this case, we're just going to throw in 12,000. 66 divided by 12 would be an experience mod of 5.5, 550% more paid on work comp premiums because of a single claim. That would put any organization out of business. There's just no way that you can absorb that kind of financial impact for something that was frankly out of your control. So the way that we address this is by capping large claims. Every state has a different claim cap, and over the last 5 years, we've slowly seen this claim dollar creep up. Something really interesting happened in 2024, though. We would kind of expect a slow, steady increase. And so I think many of myself and many of my colleagues would have expected this to be around 270, maybe a little bit higher. In 2024, the claim cap dropped dramatically to $160,000. And the reason we reached out to the people that are at the rating bureau that are responsible for coming up with these numbers, and what they told us is that this was a correction to address what they felt like was the 95th percentile of lost time claims in the state, given prior experiences. And so this was great for a lot of people, for a lot of organizations, particularly those with a few big claims, because all of a sudden you were only going to feel up to $160,000. What that means is, from a personal perspective, you as an employer, you care about your employees. No one wants really severe claims, but once a claim hits that 160, the impact to your organization and the experience mod is essentially zero every dollar over 160. So the cap is built in now. And after that 160, there's no weight. None of it hits the excess. It's like every claim over that just looks like $160,000. This is probably the most important thing we're going to talk about today, this next part about incentives to get people back to work. So if you take a single thing away from our discussion today, I want it to be this next portion. There are massive reductions or benefits added to you as an employer for every claim that you have that remains what we call medical only. So there are two parts of a work comp claim. There's medical, so that's medical attention that your injured workers seek. That can be at the ER, urgent care. It frankly doesn't matter where they get the care. If it's tied to medical care, that's part of the medical part. And then the other portion is indemnity. Indemnity kind of covers two main buckets. That is lost wages. So there's relief given to the employee for missing time away from work. So there's that piece, lost wages, and then there's also disability. There's permanent total disability, permanent partial disability, temporary total disability, and temporary partial disability. If any of this relief is provided to an employee that suffers permanent or temporary disability, that is also part of the indemnity piece. The experience mod, as long as there's only medical treatment provided and we keep employees back to work, they don't miss time away from their job, even if it's at a lower level than they might otherwise perform it, you're going to see massive implications on your experience mod for this. Just a quick note here that there are oftentimes other parts of a claim. So if an attorney is involved, for example, your insurance company might hire an attorney to help help with the process. Those expenses wouldn't be part of either medical or indemnity, and they don't influence your experience mod. So we're running tight on time. I'm going to try to hit this quickly, but this is an important part. So we're gonna linger here for a bit. The way that the reduction works is as long as you can keep an employee coming back to work and you can accommodate any restrictions they might have. So their doctor may say, while this person's healing, they can only do seated work and they may not lift over 5 pounds. And maybe you're a manufacturing organization and typically this employee would be lifting 40 pounds all day, every day, and they're on their feet all day. If you can find a way to bring them back to work, doing something in the office or somehow accommodating their workflow, as long as they're coming back to work and not missing time and they're spending time at home, that's going to be great. And that's going to be considered medical only. Otherwise, this employee, if they're missing work, even a couple weeks, that's going to have a big impact on the calculation. So let's use a couple examples here. We have two different situations. We have claim one on the first row, the green bar here, medical only claim. In this injury, the employee receives medical care that totals $2,000, but they don't miss any time away from work. There's no disability. So the total claim in this case is $2,000. In the next row, we have the same injury, but this employee, the employer is unable or chooses not to accommodate the restrictions that they receive. So there's $2,000 paid on this claim for wage replacement while they're healing. So in this case, the total claim amount is $4,000, 2 and 4. The claim that is medical only is reduced in the mod by 70%. That it is a huge, huge reduction. So let's add that reduction to the math here. Medical only claim, $2,000. Only 30% of that is going to be seen in the calculation. So that looks in the mod like a $600 claim. The indemnity claim, the full thing, 100% of it goes into the claim. So now we have one claim that's only 600, one that's 4,000. That difference is dramatic. And again, they receive the same medical treatment in these two claims. I want to give you a more extreme example. Claim one now, this is medical only. This was a serious injury, and this person had $16,000, almost $17,000 in medical bills, but their employer kept them back to work. They didn't miss any time. And so now there were no indemnity payments. So the total claim in that case is $16,666. Then we have a different one, much less severe injury, $4,900 in medical payments on this one. And in this case, there was only $100 in wage replacement. So it's relatively minor. Maybe they missed a day or two of work at most. So the total claim in this case is $5,000. Because the indemnity claim had any payments whatsoever, they don't get to see the reduction. So that's going to go in at the full amount. That looks like $5,000. The medical only claim, however, there was no indemnity, no lost time. So they get the 70% reduction. So that looks like a $5,000 claim. Now both in the mod are looking the same, but think how much more severe that injury and medical only was. Can't emphasize enough, if you're able, and often you are, and we can help support you in this process if you have questions about meaningful ways to bring people back to work and the benefits of doing that, you should do it. The impact it has on your organization is dramatic, and you will see a lot of financial reward for keeping people back to work. So we're going to run through this part quickly because I do want to end on time. And I apologize, we will not have time for Q&A today, but please ask your questions in the Q&A and we'll follow up if you have any questions whatsoever. So now we're going to take our calculation from before, and we're adding this phrase rateable. This is where that 70% reduction now comes into play. So any medical only claims are you're going to feel the primary part at first, but still reduced by 70%. Anything over the top of that, any excess, you'll get reduced down. And so now we have rateable claim dollars or expected claim dollars. And at the end of the day, that's going to be your experience mod. We've now really come full circle and introduced all the concepts that are going to have a big impact on your experience mod. So really quickly, I want to kind of introduce the experience mod worksheets. These are things that you may see, you should be seeing with your organization at least once per year, typically once per year. And this kind of outlines your experience mod. So this is what it looks like coming from Wisconsin. So if you have only Wisconsin employees, this is probably what you would be accustomed to seeing. And if you look down at the bottom here, this is actually the full calculation that we discussed. So you can see the weighting value, the ballast, we can see actual losses, the excess, all of those things get added into the calculation. And at the end of the day, the bottom right corner, you can see we have $474,000 in actual claims, over 520 in expected claims. And in this case, their actual experience is lower than their expected. So they have a mod of 0.91, 9 points better than average. So they're going to see a reduction in their work comp premiums. This is further down on the same page, and it shows the actual claims experience. We don't have time to go into all the details here on this injury type column that you'll see kind of on the left-hand side of the screen. But what I can tell you, anything other than 6 means that claim was not medical only. 6 means it's medical only. So both of these claims are going to go in at their full amount. Let's go to the next page here. I'm going to skip ahead. On the final year, these are claims from their 2022 to 2023 policy year. And you can see multiple claims here that are injury code 6. So they're going to get the reduction. You can actually also see a noteworthy one here. They have a claim that was $347,000. If you add up the 5 claims here in the actual incurred, 1,600, 7,800, 250, 174, and 347, you add all that together, that doesn't get anywhere close to 276. That number would normally be higher. But now, as we can see, they've reduced the medical only ones by 70%, and they've capped this $347,000 claim. And that's where we see the impact of those portions of relief for the employer. If you have any questions about your organization's mod, you can reach out to me or my colleague, Jason Hiller, who you may be working with already, and we can help kind of walk through your experience mod calculation and help you better understand the implication of some of these things. For anybody on the call that have employees in other states in addition to Wisconsin, your mod worksheet may look like this. At the end of the day, I want to emphasize that it's the same information, and you can see in the bottom right here, 2.9 million over 4.6 expected. This organization is much, much larger than the previous one. Their total claims expected, 4.6 million. That's a big company. Their mod is 0.63. So another great example. And you can see here that we're coming back to the injury codes. We have the 6s. These are all the medical onlys. Everything else has indemnity. At the end of the day, you can see the total impact. So we're at time. I just wanted to add one final thing. Again, please reach out to us at Houseman Group, and we can can walk you through your experience mod and give you a little more insight. We can show you the actual impact that individual claims have on your mod and your premiums. And then the last plug, in September, we want you to save the date. HGWC, our work comp seminar, available to all of you to attend. We talk about this and many other topics on work comp claim handling, safety. It's a great event. We had great turnout last year, and we expect more of the same this year. Save the date. More information will be coming. That's going to be September 24th. That's a Wednesday. It's going to be hosted on the east side. Thank you so much for attending today. I'm sorry we couldn't get to questions, but we will follow up soon.
Yes, thank you guys. And as a reminder, this webinar is recorded. You'll get a link to the recording as well as a copy of the presentation slides. Thank you so much, John, for trying to fit so much information in such a short amount of time. If you guys think of any questions, I'll be including John Oliver's contact information in the follow-up email, so be on the lookout for that. Otherwise, have a lovely rest of your morning, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.